And 1 Chronicles chapter 9, verses 31 through 32 talk about a secret recipe this bread was made with. Let me read that to you. And Mattathiah, one of the Levites, who was the firstborn of Shallum the Korite, had set office over the things that were baked on griddles. And some of their brethren and some of the Kohathanites, sorry about that, were over the showbread to prepare it every Sabbath. So like many other articles, vessels, equipment used in the tabernacle, specific families were assigned to keep it up, to make the repairs, to transport it. And for the showbread, there was one family that guarded the recipe. It was the secret recipe. The bread was changed out every Sabbath, so every 7 days, but they kept a secret, that recipe for the bread. Has been some news lately through the Temple Mount Faithful in Jerusalem, sometimes through the Temple Institute, that they may have found that family. And there's been some archaeologists, scientists, and others that have tried to replicate the bread, and they've never been able to do it. Now there's one man who believes he has that original recipe that's been protected, and he's tried out and he has baked this showbread. He indicates that the fine flour that is used is very similar to what they make pasta out of in Italy. If that is meaningful to you, all I know is it's very fine flour. So the sons had charge of the baking and setting in order the bread of the row, it's called in 1 Chronicles 9. Now what that means is these Levites, not only did they take care of preparing the bread for each week, they also were part of exchanging it on the Sabbath. This bread would be taken out, and as this bread was being taken out, a new set was brought in, so the table would never be without bread, never be empty. And some say that the bread actually remained fresh even in the desert for a full 7 days. And that's not unreasonable. There are a lot of breads that are made today that do remain fresh. The outside may form a harder crust, but the inside is still very tasty, still very moist, still very spongy, so to speak. So the Jewish tradition tells us that this family, their specific name within this tribe, this clan, so to speak, was Garmu, Garmu, and they were the experts in preparing the table of showbread. The bread, remember, never dried out, never became stale, never became moldy, and it had to be baked quickly, similar to matzah today, so it would not rise, because this bread most likely was without leaven, and there's just natural leavens in the air, so if it's not baked quickly, just mixing it with water, it could rise if the process was delayed. So very special face bread. The sages asked them to teach other people to know how to make this bread, so it wouldn't be tied up with just one family. Let others know what the secret of preparing the showbread. But the Garmu family said no. We're not sharing the secret with anyone. This is our duty. This is what God wants us to do. And from generation to generation, this is what we're going to do. This is our ministry, and we're not going to share that with anyone. So specialists were brought in from Alexandria, Egypt, who knew how to bake. And in spite of their many attempts at replicating the bread of presence, the showbread, the face bread, their loaves became moldy. So the Garmus family was summoned back to their job, and once again, showbread was being made. When they were asked, well, why wouldn't you teach someone else? We realize that this is a ministry that's special to you. We realize that you want to make sure that you're always contributing, but why wouldn't you at least share the recipe with others so it wouldn't be lost? And here's what their answer was. They were concerned that an unworthy man would learn how to make the showbread and possibly use that bread to serve an idol. So they guarded it. They realized that this bread was sacred. And so the family was actually known to be very honest and trustworthy. And the showbread that they made was from the cleanest flour that they could produce, of the highest grade, that had been sifted time and time and time again, so there was no impurities in it. And just to make sure that people knew that this was a family of integrity, this family never ate bread from the same flour, the same grain that they made the showbread from. They would only eat simple or rough bread, so no one would even suspect them of eating the holy bread that would be presented to God. And so it was amazing. Now, Numbers chapter 4, verse 7. The table was never for a moment left without some loaves lying on it. Now, why is that important? The table of showbread, you'll notice on our table, there are 12 loaves of bread. Okay? You have 6 here and 6 here. These represented each of the 12 tribes. Now, it is believed that people gave their yearly contributions or offerings to keep the ministry of the Levites going, and that the money from some of those funds was used to provide the Garmu family the funds to secure the appropriate wheat and to take care of the producing the showbread. But each one of these loaves represented one of the 12 tribes. So the whole nation was participated in presenting this bread to God. Now, it was never, ever empty. And that's quite a feat. But why is that important? Well, let's look at the verse again and just think through why this would be important. If it was exchanged out on the Sabbath, that's the day of God's rest, the day that man doesn't work, and he would focus his spirit and focus his energies on studying and thinking about the Lord. But if every tribe contributed to this, it's a symbol of man's continued unbroken dependence upon God. Even when the tabernacle was moved to a new location, the table, which was wrapped in particular colored cloths, was always with bread, never without it. That's why the one verse says that it was called continual bread, because it was always there. So somehow, by presenting this bread, we see the culmination of man's struggle to feed himself. Today, when we go to the store, we have shelves full of bread. We just look at which one we want, we pull it off the shelf, we think nothing about it. But in biblical times, bread was the main staple. Bread was the main food. Meat was a luxury for people. So bread is what kept people alive. And they couldn't just pull it off the shelf. So we see the hand of God in this completed bread. The priests would have seen the hand of God in this completed bread, and it's presented before his face. The Ark of the Covenant's back there, and that's where the presence of God, the Shekinah, resided. So we see the hand of God in the completed bread that is presented before his face or his presence as an acknowledgement of his work behind the scenes. Now, what do I mean by that? When the tribes brought this bread, what they were saying was, God, we realize we are acknowledging our dependence on you. We know that without you, we wouldn't have bread to eat. Now, this is not bread that God's going to eat. This was an offering, so to speak, weekly that the priests ended up eating, but it was an acknowledgement each week, like clockwork on the Sabbath. Lord, as a nation, we're acknowledging our dependence on you. You've presented us with seed that reproduces itself for the next harvest. You're permitting us to have the strength to plow, to plant, and to harvest. In producing the rain and the sun to nurture and grow the wheat, protecting the stalks from the hazards of everyday life, providing the knowledge to us to grind, sift, refine the grain, and turn the dough into nutritious bread. For you are providing favor on us in behalf, time and time again. You're providing favor to us. You're taking care of us. So as they stand before the table and exchange that bread each week, they are replacing the bread and remembering this experience in their lives that God, we got a covenant with him. He's continually taking care of us. Without him, without the sun, without the rain, without the knowledge he gives us, we'd be nowhere. We wouldn't be able to take care of our families. His dwelling is in our midst every time they looked at the bread. With this bread of presence, this face bread, the everlasting covenant is reaffirmed.
Many times over the years, Dr. Harmon has been asked if his pictures of the high priest's garments and the tabernacle were available for the general public. We're pleased to announce that 2 new resources for ministers, rabbis, Sunday school teachers, and anyone waiting to make their Bible reading come alive are now available. The garments of the high priest contain the 8 golden garments of the high priest, as well as the 4 white linen garments of all the other Levitical priests. The pattern of the tabernacle contains more than enough slides for the teacher who wants to deliver several stunning lessons on every part of the tabernacle of Moses, including the altar of burnt sacrifice, the laver, the menorah, the table of showbread, the golden altar of incense, and the Ark of the Covenant. These 2 resources will capture the attention of your congregation, young and old alike.